Started? No. Okay. Welcome to this week's APRG seminar. Today we have Sutanu Rai from NISER Bhubaneswar, and he will talk about homogeneous quantum symmetries of finite spaces over the circle group. Sutanu Rai.
Okay. Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity to present my ongoing work. This is not yet complete, no, it's not yet finished, but I will report mostly the known stuff, because I think this particular topic is well, it's the quantum symmetries. I mean, symmetries of quantum spaces is quite a old. I mean, in a sense, this is a well-developed topic, but I think most of the time, I mean, major amount of time I'll be spending on what has been done, and in the end, I will come to the title, basically the first two sentences, the homogeneous and the last part over the circle group part. So just to make it self-contained, what is a C-star algebra? I mean, I know it's a boring slide, but to most of you, but anyway, it's just a concrete norm-closed. I mean, it's a norm-closed star subalgebra of bounded operators on a Hilbert space, and here the most important fact is we are actually working with the norm topology, not any other topology on B of H. And then the next thing is the characterization or the structure theorem, which is for finite dimensional C-star algebras. It is like an Artin-Wedden-Byrne type result, which basically says that if you have a finite dimensional C-star algebra, that means the underlying vector space, if it is finite dimensional, then it is direct sum of matrix algebras of different sizes. So yeah, and this basically, in particular, this says that if you want an example of I mean, for instance, if you want a finite dimensional C-star algebra to be commutative, then the only option that we have is Cn. There is no other option that we can have. And then the final preliminary on this note is the Gelfand duality, which is a non-trivial result, a highly non-trivial result, but also this is the key towards to the non-commutative geometry, so to speak. So basically, it says that it's a characterization result. It basically characterizes commutative C-star algebras in general. But since I'll be mostly working with unital C-star algebras, actually not mostly, I'll be working throughout the talk. I'll be working with unital C-star algebras. I just mentioned the unital version of it. So it basically says that given a unital commutative C-star algebra, it is isometrically isomorphic to some continuous functions on a compact Hausdorff space, and this space is given by the spectrum of A, which is set of all characters on one-dimensional representations on A, or the characters on A. And this particular theorem, it also tells us that you can understand a compact Hausdorff space. So in other words, from the C-star algebra structure, you can actually recover the topology on the spectrum, and that therefore on the spectrum of A, which is a Hausdorff topology, compact Hausdorff topology. And now if you start with a compact Hausdorff space, if you now consider the set of all continuous functions, complex valued continuous functions on the space, you can actually get a C-star algebra, commutative unital C-star algebra back. So Gelfand duality is actually a duality between space and C-star algebras in a sense. So more generally speaking, this is basically says that compact Hausdorff spaces are the category of compact Hausdorff spaces are a dual to commutative to the dual to the category of commutative unital C-star algebra. So in particular, the space, the category of compact Hausdorff spaces sits inside the category of unital sister algebras dually. So because this assignment is contravariant, not covariant. So anyway, so that's what the Gelfand duality tells us. But now from here, what if we have a non-commutative C-star algebra, even unital but non-commutative? Then obviously the spectrum can be very small, even if the C-star algebra is non-commutative. But the spectrum can become really small, and therefore you cannot recover the original C-star algebra from the spectrum, obviously. And this is the point where non-commutative geometry or non-commutative, I mean, anything which has to do non-commutative in flavor, which is of non-commutative in flavor in analysis, comes in the picture. So what you do is so from this, what we do is that if we have a non-commutative C-star algebra, then you just view it abstractly as spectrum of A, and where the spectrum of A is not, it's not mathematically, it is actually it can be a very small object, but it's an abstract spectrum. So that is the reason I write it down as an abstract, cap it, by red. So this basically means that if you have a non-commutative sister algebra, then you say it is just a brute force way of saying, or philosophical way of saying that, okay, non-commutative sister algebras are algebra of functions on some space, and that space you call as quantum space, whose existence is completely virtual. So virtually you say that, okay, for a non-commutative sister algebra, this is basically C of instead of spectrum of X, you just like C of X, where this space X is actually, you call it a quantum space, whose existence is virtual. So this means that you are no longer working with points. Instead of points, you will be working with functions. I mean, functions, or in other words, not functions, actually you'll be working with operators. And as you know that pointwise multiplication of two operators commute, but obviously composition of, pointwise multiplication of functions commute, but the composition of two operators do not commute. And from there, you actually, this is basically the notion of quantum space as per se. And basically that is what, which is a philosophical way of looking at, is a compact quantum space is nothing but an abstract spectrum of a non-commutative C-star algebra, which means, if you take a unital non-commutative C-star algebra, then you basically say there is an underlying space whose existence is completely virtual, and you say that space is the quantum space, and then your C-star algebra is the analogous to the algebra of functions on the quantum space. That is the more or less the idea.
In fact, in algebra, this is also exactly what happens for quantum groups in algebraic setting also.
Yeah, exactly.
One uses commutative half algebras that way, and then non-commutative half algebras in the.
Exactly, precisely. That is the same
exactly.
Same notion we are working with here as well. Now, as I said, like I'll be mostly mostly working with quantum spaces. Finite. As I said, I mentioned finite spaces. That means. So now, okay. So when do you say, so if you have a quantum space, so now we have the notion of a quantum space. Now the question is, when do we say a quantum space is finite? So in particular for sets, we say the cardinality, but for quantum spaces, since we don't have any underlying set any longer, but we do have an algebra. So we say, okay, basically the dimension of the algebra will define the cardinality of the quantum space again. So from that perspective, which means finite quantum spaces, or maybe finite space, whether it's classical or quantum, you basically say that it's just finite dimensional C-star algebra. And the first example is obviously Cn, n copies of complex numbers. And this is basically, we know from it's a commutative C-star algebra to be in particular. So by the Gelfand's theorem, we know this is isomorphic to C of X for some compact Hausdorff space, and in particular, it's a finite, so therefore the space must be discrete. And in particular, I mean, even in this particular, this is easy to calculate the spectrum of Cn, which is nothing but just endpoint space. So indeed, if you have a commutative sister algebra, then Gelfand's theorem actually tells you can recover an underlying space. So in this particular example, quantum space and actually do exist, and that is nothing but the classical space in that sense. But the situation changes drastically if you just pass to matrix algebra, for instance. Instead of Cn, if you just take MNC, then obviously, then the existence of this F is completely virtual. I mean, it's virtual. There is no such space a priori. And then you say, okay, MNC is actually algebra of functions on a quantum space whose cardinality is n squared, which is the dimension of MNC. And now, in particular, if you just go one step forward, which generalizes both of these two situations, if you just take the direct sum of matrices, then the dimension of the underlying quantum space is basically the sum of the square of, I mean, sum of the dimension of each of these matrix algebras. And yeah, and in particular, if all of these ni's are 1, then basically you recover the first example. And if you just take n, I mean, so from k I equal to 2 to k onwards, if you just say okay, they are 0, then basically you just recover the second example. So yeah, anyway, so this is the most general way of viewing finite quantum spaces in this approach. And then with this dictionary, we can just become a bit brave and basically say that, okay, given any finite dimensional C-star algebra, we can denote it by C of F, where F is the underlying quantum space of A, and the cardinality of F is given by the dimension. I mean, cardinality of the quantum space is given by the dimension of A. So once again, C of F, this notation, it doesn't mean that, okay, A is commutative. A can be non-commutative, but this is the quantum space. So in a sense, F is the abstract spectrum of A in that terminology. Okay, so this notation I'll be using later on as well. So just to make sure that, okay, this is exactly what it means. Anyway. Now, okay, once we have the notion of quantum spaces, then the next question is can we talk about group structure on these quantum spaces? And that exactly brings quantum groups in the picture. Now, quantum groups can be approached from various directions. But for today's talk, I'll be interested only one particular approach. But let me just recall some of the known celebrated results. The first one goes back to the work of Greenfeld and Jimbo, where actually they have studied. The quantum groups came up naturally in the study of quantum integrable systems as a solution to the Yang-Baxter equation. So this is known as Drinfeld's double construction, which basically says that if you start with a finite dimensional Hopf algebra, then you can do the double groups construction, Drinfeld's double, which will actually have an R matrix. So in other words, this means the representation category of the Drinfeld's double is braided monoidal category. So that gives you the solution to R matrix. This was purely in the algebraic setting. In the next thing was to understand several important duality results, namely for compact groups, which is a very, quite a difficult, not easily approachable result, but which is a very celebrated result known as Tanaka-Klein duality, which basically says that given a compact group, you can recover the group from its representation category. So the question was, can one do the same thing? Can one generalize this Tanaka-Klein type results for more general object? And it was actually one of the milestone in the theory of compact quantum groups done by Voronovich. He proved that Tanaka-Klein result is true for compact quantum groups, which he introduced. And the next thing was, okay, can one understand the Pointryagin duality result for more general objects, namely For locally compact abelian groups, we know that the bidual is isomorphic to the original one. But if the group is non-abelian, you cannot talk about dual group at all. But the question is, is it possible to extend the notion of groups where you can talk, you'll be able to talk about Pontryagin duality type results for non-abelian groups. And that actually, the quantum groups came as a solution to that problem. And this was actually developed in complete generality by several authors. The locally compact quantum groups, of course, this was first axiomatized by Bajan Skandalis and then Voronovich, and then Kustermans and Vass came up with the most popular definition of locally compact quantum groups. Here, I would like to make one remark. There is actually, if you study locally compact quantum group theory, then you might see that, okay, these two approach is, and these two, I mean, the first two approach and the last approach, they are actually some sort of, they're not exactly equivalent. So the thing is, in the theory of locally compact groups, there is a canon, I mean, there is a deep result, of course, namely the existence of Haar measure. So if you have a locally compact group, you can prove the existence of Haar measure. So far, there is no axioms. So far, there is no axiom which actually shows that, okay, if you start with a locally compact quantum group, you can prove the existence of analog, something will play the role of Haar measure, namely Haar weight. So these two approach actually, the Voronovich and Bas-Skandalis approach actually started into that direction, but it is still not, it's still open. But Kustermans and Vass, they actually assumed the existence of Haar measure and developed the whole theory. So if you start with the Kustermans-Vass theory, you can reach to Voronovich approach. But if you start with the Voronovich approach, this is still not known whether you can prove the existence of Haar weights. But it is not that bad. The reason why Kustermans-Vass theory is popular because it allows you to do much more. I mean, once you have a measure, you can do more analysis than its absence. And secondly, all the examples, I mean, most of the examples that are known, examples of locally compact quantum groups, the number of examples are very few, but in the all existing examples, the existence of Haar weight exists. So it's not a measure anymore, it's not a state, it's a weight, because the underlying sister algebra becomes non-unital. So anyway, that's just some side remark. The most interesting appearance, at least of quantum groups, is in the realm of quantum symmetries of quantum spaces. Or this particular these works actually sort of bridged the theory of quantum groups and non-commutative geometry together. And as I mentioned in my abstract, it was basically motivated by a question asked by Alan Kohn. So he basically asked, okay, what will be the notion of quantum symmetries of spaces, any space, finite, classical, or quantum, whatever. And then Wang came up with the solution, the quantum symmetries of finite spaces, which I'll be mostly focusing today. But of course, there are, I mean, after his work, it's been it turned out to be an enormous important result, and enormous, how do I say, like, it's actually sort of, it became like Wang's result actually initiated an industry. So quantum symmetries of finite metric spaces, finite graphs, unital sister algebras with orthogonal filtrations, and more or less in the same line, Goswami, he proved actually the notion of isometries of compact spectral trivial, which actually are the analog of compact Riemannian, non-commutative analog of the compact Riemannian manifolds, which was introduced by Alan Kohn himself. So anyway, for today, we will be focusing on this part, the quantum symmetries of finite spaces. Okay. So, but before that, let me just briefly, if you know already Hopf algebra, then you probably know these things are quite straightforward. But the one difference, analytic, this is a difficulty of analysis, that if you know Hopf algebra theory, you know that you just basically take all the group operations and all the maps, and then you just dualize it into you just form the dual in the sense of category, basically the duality between space and algebra. But in the case of compact quantum groups or in the analytic setting, you cannot do that. The reason is because the inverse map in the group, you have a notion of inverse. But in case of quantum groups, in the sister algebraic setting, if you talk about inverse, the inverse map may not be defined on the whole algebra. Or in other words, this map is unbounded if you want to define it on the whole, becomes unbounded. If you
Are
want
you
to
saying
define
the
it on the whole.
antipode? The antipode becomes unbounded or something? You're saying?
Yeah, the co-inverse. Yeah, the antipode.
Okay.
The analog of the inverse, yes, antipode.
Right,
yes.
right.
So yeah, in the context of in the analytic theory, meaning in the sister algebraic context, this becomes that's a problem because we cannot work with unbounded operators. I mean, we can,
but the co-unit is fine, and so until the bialgebra stage it is fine. But
until the bialgebra stage it is fine. Co-unit is also another tricky thing. It may not exist also because, for instance, if you take okay, since you raised the topic, so for instance, if you take so if you know already something called reduced group sister algebra for a locally compact group,
okay,
and then the co-unit must be some map of this sort. And now what happens, because unit map is what, embedding of E inside G, then the co-unit will be from C0G to E.
It's evaluation at E usually.
Evaluation.
Yeah.
And now the point is, this means this map will be an algebra homomorphism. In particular, it should be a character. Now, if the group is non-amenable, then this map won't exist. So that is another issue.
Would it live in some kind of formal completion or something? Makes sense of a topological analysis.
Yeah, if you go to the now if you go to the so reduced group sister algebra is a small completion. If you go to a larger completion, which means the full group sister algebra, their co-unit exists. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
That is true. But for compact case, you can actually handle the situation in a much clever way. This is due because of there is a classic result. I forgot the citation. It basically says that if you have a compact semi-group with cancellation property, then it's a compact group.
Okay.
So in the quantum case, what Voronovich actually did, he actually took this path. So he actually started with a bialgebra, and he defined the cancellation property using some density conditions. Basically, these conditions. These conditions. So cancellation property can be for groups can be formulated in these terms. So in this density conditions, and these actually conditions looks maybe a bit awkward, but this is not that difficult. It actually something to do with so once you know completion, then basically what you have to show is that this is dense in CG cross and tensor CG, and this basically means that you actually, if you know that this set separates points of CG, tensor CG, then you are done by the Stone-Weierstrass. And that is exactly what Voronovich did. So this was the most intelligent part, which actually, in order to define the definition of compact quantum groups, so was done by Voronovich. So yeah, you don't actually, this also shows that it is not that, okay, if you have a map, you just dualize it. It may not be the good idea all the time. Because, and so yeah, something different might be useful here, necessary here. So yeah, so this is basically saying that how can you view a group as a quantum group, compact quantum group. And then once you have this, then this is basically the formal definition. So a compact quantum group is a pair, which is basically consisting of a sister algebra CG, not necessarily commutative, but as I said that, okay, every sister algebra can be thought of as C of G for some abstract G. So that is what it is written here. So it's a commutative sister algebra. Sorry, it's a non-commutative unital sister algebra and unital star homomorphism, such that you have the co-associativity and then the cancellation conditions. Exactly what we have seen for the groups. You just replace functions by the elements of your sister algebra. And here one thing one has to keep in mind, that here we are working with the minimal tensor product of sister algebras. We are not, because so the thing is, if you have two sister algebras, you can define well, many sister completions on the tensor products. So the minimal one is the minimal, is basically is the minimal in some sense. So you can characterize it in the fact by the fact that okay, you have two injective maps, then the tensor of two injective map is injective. So that can be one characterization for the minimal tensor product. And now if so, okay, sorry, I think at some point I wrote it A. So at some point, so basically, if C of G is commutative in the definition above, then basically you will have a group, compact group. So if the underlying sister algebra of a compact group is commutative, then actually it comes from a compact group. So it's actually, you can say, okay, it follows from the Gelfand's theorem more or less, but not that straightforward way. You have to do some work. Okay, so this is the definition of a compact group, and then we know at least how to view a compact quantum group, and we know how to view a compact group as a compact quantum group. So the question is, are there non-trivial examples? And of course there are, but we'll be discussing one such today, a concrete one. Now, once we have the notion of finite space, sorry, it has to be finite space, not finite classical. Let me correct it. Okay. So once you have the notion of an action of a compact, so the next thing is we want to understand the symmetry of quantum spaces, finite quantum spaces. That means we need to define an action of a compact quantum group on finite space. That means on this direct sum of matrix algebras. So we fix, in a sense, we fix a finite quantum space, which is basically given by this. And this is a definition. Basically, this says an action of a compact quantum group on a finite space is actually an injective unital star homomorphism, just dualizing the notion of an action. So for a group action, you know that this is basically F cross G to F. And now if you just want to, if you want to dualize it, you will just put everywhere C. And then what you will get is, you will get a map from here to here. And now this is for commutative one. And now if you choose, this is, by the way, isomorphic to C of F, tensor C of G. And now you just say, declare C of F, and C of G are non-commutative. And then you just try to make sense of this definition. So yeah, so it's an injective unital star homomorphism such that this condition basically says that that it's actually, you know, for group action, it has to be compatible with the binary of, in some sense, it has to be compatible with the binary operation of the group. So this basically gives you that compatibility. So in the Hopf algebra language, this is actually some co-action, co-module structure over CG. And then the second condition is purely analytic. This basically, sometimes this condition is called Podlesh condition. So this condition is an additional condition that you need to require incomplete generality. But yeah, in the context of finite spaces, I just wrote this condition because I just wanted to write down the most general definition of an action of a quantum group on a space. But here one has to remember that, okay, if our space is finite, then this condition is somehow more or less automatic. Actually, it just follows automatically. But yeah, this is some sort of density condition that you need to assume on the top of the first two conditions. So then you say, and this defines an action of a quantum group on this finite space. Now, using this, Wang actually described the notion of quantum symmetry group of a finite space. So here, what he used is, he used some category theoretic, some universal property of, actually. So given a finite space, classical space, let's say if you have 3 points space, then we know that the quantum symmetry is basic. I mean, the symmetry group is nothing but the permutation S3 group. Now, S3 can be also characterized using some universal property, namely that, okay, you will say that, okay, it's a universal object in the category of groups that act on the 3-point space faithfully. So universal in the sense that if you have any other group which will be acting on on 3-point space faithfully, then S3 will sit inside. S3 will be a subgroup. So it's a how do you call it, initial object or final object of this category. So yeah, it's universal in either of those. I think yeah, it's an initial object. So that's how the quantum symmetry can be expressed as universal object of in some category. And this approach was, by the way, already adopted by Yuri Manin before Wang actually described this, but in a slightly different context, and also in a slightly different way. But Wang actually did it in a more in the finite quantum space setting. By the way, all the notions of quantum symmetry, the existence, for instance, quantum isometry group of a spectral triple, that was also proved by Goswami, and he also proved that okay, it's a universal object in some category. Okay, now we are going to deal with this algebra. So now what the next thing will be to write down the generators and relations of this algebra C of F. But now observe that if you just have only one copy, then we have two indices, right? And now if you have more than one copies, then we will have three indices. That's basically, it's a multi-matrix. An element of C of F is nothing but a multi-matrix. And the multiplication law will be not complicated. It's just you have to do some bookkeeping. Namely, so for instance, if you have a matrix here, direct 1, 1, 1, and if you have a matrix here, direct some 1, 1, 1 rest of the part, then if you multiply them, this should give you this matrix times this matrix. But if you have zeros, then basically 0 and then so if you have 0, A, and rest here 0, and if you have A, 0, then if you multiply, then you should get 0 because they belong to two different copies. So you have to do this bookkeeping all the time. But this was actually cleverly done. At least the reference that I actually found is by Banika. So he somehow did it in a very clever way by saying that, okay, instead of using multi-index, you just use the single index. So what he did is he just considered these triples, and he defined a partial multiplication and involution. So the partial multiplication means if you have these conditions satisfied, that means if your two matrices come from the same copy, then you can multiply them. So if you have R and S to be equal, then basically you have a matrix AB and ECD. And then the matrix multiplication is EAD and if B equals to C, so delta BC. And otherwise you just define it to be phi, empty set, triple. And involution is defined by just transpose. So AB transpose is BA. And then using this multi-index approach, what Banika actually, then it is actually easy to observe that the C of F is an universal C-star algebra generated by this multimetric basis. So if you take an index I of this form, this actually represents EABR. So it's the Rth elementary matrix AB belonging to the Rth copy. And it satisfies these conditions. So then the multiplication is given by this multiplication rule. In adjoint is given by this the involution, and then this basically gives you the, if you take the sum of the diagonal matrices, you get just the one, which means that you are actually preserving the, so the trace is the normalized trace. So basically this corresponds to the normalized trace on A. So on Mn, so if you have Mn, then you know the trace is basically the sum of the diagonals, and then you normalize it by just by dividing by the corresponding dimension. So here you are just working with the normalized trace here. Okay, so now we have the generators and relations of CF, and this will be useful to define the notion of quantum symmetry group of finite spaces. So given this these generators and relations, Wang actually proved that there is a universal compact quantum group which is denoted by Sn plus acting on F, meaning it's a quantum group acts on F, and it preserves the counting measure. So counting measure means, so if you have a finite space, then classical space, then you have the counting measure. Now, if you just replace the finite space just by the algebra of functions, then basically the counting measure becomes the trace, right? So counting measure of f means it preserves the normalized trace on f, C of f. And this explicit presentation is given by the following. So the underlying sister algebra of CSN plus is generated by these elements uij, where ij belongs to this these triplets actually. Okay, and with the following relations. So these relations are actually, you can, if you just compute, then these relations can be obtained. And the co-multiplication map is given by this. So this, if you just observe this co-multiplication map, that means the quantum group structure on Sn, this is nothing but some sort of dualization of the matrix multiplication. So it is not, so in case of matrix multiplication, you have uik times ukj. So here you just put a tensor in between. So this gives you the co-multiplication map on G. And with this co-multiplication map, CSN, Sn actually becomes a compact quantum group. And moreover, the action of this universal action of Sn plus on F is given by this. So this is just, you can view this as permutation. So quantum permutation, these UJIs, these are matrix coefficient of this for this action gamma. And this can be viewed as permutation which sends I to J. Permutation, classically, this is the this actually is the permutation which sends I to J. Okay, so any questions so far regarding this? Okay, so if not, then let me just but this was so if you just go to the Wang's original paper, you will see that it is written in a much more different, in a different form. That means, so of course it is written explicitly. Explicitly means he explicitly used this multi matrices, these matrices, and then he just transferred this relation using those matrices. And if you do that, then you will see that this relation will be sum over, like there will be two more summations will come everywhere more or less, and so on. Okay, now from here I would like to just so this is what Wang did. Now let me just mention some special cases. So some special cases. So number one, if you choose your F to be just finite set, Fn, finite set, yeah, then C Sn plus is non-commutative for all n greater than equals to 4. This is a very important observation which was made by Wang, which means that, observe that here. So our finite space was, so this means that I'm choosing each of these n1, n2 up to nk, they have to be 1. That means, yeah, so this is just a classical space. So if you just consider a classical space, then the CSN, the underlying sister algebra of the quantum symmetry group, will be non-commutative when only for n greater than equals to 4, which means if your n is 1, 2, or 3, so this means CSN plus, So this means Sn plus is isomorphic to Sn for n equals to 1, 2, 3. That means if you have 3-point set, up to 3-point set, you can only find classical permutations. You cannot find any quantum permutation. So, okay. That is one thing. So maybe this is first thing. And the second thing is, if you just take Csn plus commute, just consider this I mean just quotient by this ideal. That means you just force the relation that okay, all the elements of Csn plus must commute. If you do this, then what you get is nothing but Csn. That means algebra of functions on standard permutation group. This means so that this basically justifies this notation Sn plus. So if you look at the C-star algebra in terms of generators and relations of Sn, Csn plus, and liberate them. Liberate means you say, okay, they no longer commute because here they are functions. But if you just say, okay, now I just replace them by some abstract elements, and I don't want them to commute, then what exactly you will get is nothing but the quantum symmetry group. The next thing is if C of F is M2C, 2x2 matrices, then Sn plus is nothing but SO3. So on one hand, if you just start with permutations, classical permutation, classical permutations, then finite space, classical space, then up to 3 there is no quantum symmetry. So in other words, this is somehow called that okay, there is no quantum symmetry for finite spaces. That means if you start with a 4-point set, then there are some quantum symmetries apart from S4. So sometimes these things are called hidden symmetry. I think it was mentioned in one of the books of Manin somewhere. So this is sometimes this is called hidden symmetry. And also on the matrix case, in the non-commutative genuine quantum case, it is not a classical phenomena no longer. It's actually a quantum, also for the non-commutative space as well. So if you work with 2x2 matrices, then also the quantum symmetry group can be classical as well. Okay. Now, what I wanted, so by the way, how much time do I have? This is something will be important.
15.
No?
15, 20 minutes.
Okay.
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
Then, okay. Okay, so let me just, okay, let me, so this description of Wang, this can be also, so this is actually some sort of, a priori, this looks like some sort of, some non-commutative, or maybe, it's too ambitious maybe to say, but this actually, these are actually some sort of quantum Lie group type object. This is actually was called this was called as compact matrix pseudo group by Voronovich. So this whole thing, this whole description, which was done by Wang, can be rephrased in a different language. So it can be seen as a quotient of unitary quantum group. So basically, what is that? So unitary quantum group is another well-known object. So it's basically is the following. So this is called free unitary quantum group. So this is basically denoted by UN plus. So this is the underlying C-star algebra. This is generated by sister algebra of Uij, okay, where for n number of elements I comma j equals to 1 to n, such that U star is U inverse. So these elements entries are no longer complex numbers. They are just, I mean, if you wish, you can take them, think of them as bounded operators. So U star is U inverse, and U transpose is U inverse, U bar inverse, where U bar is nothing but Uij star. And co-multiplication map is just the way it was defined before. So this is called the free unitary group. Now, this in particular, this condition, I mean, like here, this condition actually tells us this is actually an unitary element. It's an unitary matrix. This matrix is unitary, and this underlying sister algebra is generated by this matrix coefficient of U. So in that sense, so that is why this is called, this U is called the fundamental unitary. So U, which is Uij, is called the fundamental unitary, and this condition actually tells us that U is a unitary representation. I mean, in the Hopf algebraic language, this is called co-representation. But here in the quantum group, in the compact quantum group case, it is called representation. So U is called a representation of, in fact, U is a unitary representation of UN plus, and it's an n dimensional unitary representation. Now, once you have this, then you can talk about tensor product of representations. U tensor U, it is defined as in the leg numbering notation U13, U23, which is in Cn tensor Cun plus tensor Cun plus. So where U is viewed as summation, sorry, not Cn plus, compact operators on Cn plus, which is basically Mn. So Eij tensor Uij. Then you can actually explicitly write down what exactly this U13, U23 means. Okay. Now, this is again, it is easy to verify that this is actually tensor product of representations of U with itself. And since it's a representation, one can talk about intertwiners and so on. And that is one thing. And the next thing is, now recall CF, our quantum space, the original quantum space, CF. Now let F be a finite quantum space with mod F equals to n. If we now do this, then this n is now different than, I mean, this n can be is a different n, and then this one, and then so for this n you can talk about free unitary group, of course, which is a compact quantum group, and then what we can do is, this was proved by Banica, that C of Sn plus is nothing but C of Un plus quotient by the following thing: M intertwiner, which is M, which is in Hom U tensor U comma U, and basically Hom C comma not C, trivial representation U, where eta, where M is the multiplication just a moment, multiplication of CF, and eta is the unit map. Unit map means eta is basically the embedding of unit inside C of F. So this description is more concrete and more representation theoretic. So this description shows that like for classical permutation groups, quantum permutation groups are also subgroups of unitary groups. Okay. Now, once you have this, now the braided, now basically what I wanted to talk about, let me just tell you the framework, and then maybe finally I'll just tell you the main result. So equip Cn with an action of the circle group. Okay, so this means we can fix a basis. So then fix an eigenbasis for Cn, sorry, such that if you just maybe I call the circle action to be alpha, alpha z of ei will be z to the di ei, where di is in z and I is in 1 to up to n. Okay, so this is the first ingredient, and the second ingredient is fix some zeta in an element in S1 and consider the bicharacter Rmn Rmn to be zeta to the mn. So this is basically a bicharacter. Not only that, this is an R matrix. So R is an R matrix on S1 while viewed as a compact quantum group. So this means S1, it's an abelian group. So, and R is a bicharacter on the dual group. And since everything is abelian here, we have this nice situation that, okay, R defines an R matrix on the circle, on the circle group. So this means the representation category of S1 is braided by this zeta. So this means then we define a unitary braiding operator, call it this, from any Hilbert space H1 tensor H2 to H2 tensor H1 by, so let's say EI tensor, maybe here I get lambda I tensor mu J is mapped to zeta to the power minus degree lambda I degree mu J tensor lambda I, where H1 and H2 are S1 Hilbert spaces, and that means S1 has a unit. I mean, S1 has a unitary representation on those Hilbert spaces, and these elements are homogeneous elements of degree, some degree, homogeneous elements. And then this defines a braiding operator. So once you have this, then in particular, so having this, now in particular, we consider this previous circle action on Cn, which was denoted by alpha. Then for this action alpha and this R matrix with this braiding operator, what I proved is the following, that using this data, I can define a braided analog of free unitary quantum group, number one, and number two, C of Sn plus, this is actually, if I call it B braided unitary, then algebra of C of Bsn plus will be C of Bun plus, and then you quotient by the same thing, multiplication map in Hom U tensor U to U, and eta, which is in Hom one-dimensional representation U. But the only difference here is, but U tensor U, here, I mean, if you just recall, here, if you define U tensor U, U13 acts on first and third leg, U23 acts on second. Oh, sorry. This will be K of Cn here as well. So U13 acts on first and third leg, and U23 acts on second and third leg. And to define this U13, you have to just flip these two and then let it act on the first two leg and then flip it back. So in a sense, you are using the tensor flip. So instead of tensor flip, but to define we use braiding, unitary braiding operator that we have obtained from here. And that is the first thing. And the final thing is the co-multiplication map on UN plus. So this will be again generated by some type of like matrix elements, fundamental unitary. The co-multiplication map will no longer take the value in the tensor product, but the twisted braided tensor product. So it will be UIK box UKJ, where summation is over 1 to n. And this box zeta is basically defined in the following way. So where A box 1 is in the Hilbert space representation, A tensor 1, but 1 box B is braiding B box 1 dual braiding. So it is like you can just recover the ordinary picture if you just replace this braiding by flip. And so this way, so this, but then the punchline is this object not only captures the quantum symmetry of finite spaces, but it also remembers the circle action on the space. I mean, on the space means if you let the circle act on finite space, then you can let it act on the MN, the finite quantum space, mainly this direct sum of algebras. And this quantum group remembers the action, circle action, in terms of this twisted co-multiplication map. I mean, not twisted co-multiplication map, in terms of this co-multiplication map, which takes the value in the braided tensor product. And yeah, and this is basically, I mean, I have not. This is not available yet. I mean, it's available in archive, but in a very bad form, because it was written using the Wang's original work, but it becomes more conceptual if you write it down in terms of this. If you write down the relations in terms of the intertwiners, more representation theoretic perspective, and yeah, and it shows that, okay, indeed it is also a subgroup of the universal unitary group. And yeah, I think maybe that's a good time to stop, and I'm sorry for the overtime.
Yeah, thank you very much for a nice talk.
Thank you.
Are there some questions or comments? Yeah, if there are no questions, I think let's thank the speaker once again.
Thank you.
Maybe you
Thank
can...
you for the invitation.
Thank you.